everyone. I'm Kim Mack. Welcome to the fourth event in the 2025-2026 iteration of the Popular Music Books and Process series, a collaboration between the Journal of Popular Music Studies, IASPM US, and the POP Conference. Thank you to my co-organizers, Eric Weisbard, Francesca Royster, Gus Stadler, Carl Wilson, Elena Roslagova, and Alex Vizi. On November 19th, Allison Bumstead and Peter Richardson will be here to discuss their respective recent and in-progress books, Teen Set, Teen Fan Magazines and Rock Journalism, Don't Let the Name Fool You, and Brand New Beat, The Wild Rise of Rolling Stone Magazine. You can find the full schedule on the IASPM US website under the Journal tab, and previous recorded sessions of the Popular Music Books and Process series are archived on Eric's YouTube channel. Today, we're very excited to have Dan Beck and Jerry Portnoy here to discuss their respective books. You've got Michael, Living Through History, and Dancing with Muddy, Muddy Waters, Eric Clapton, and My Lucky Life in and Out of the Blues. They will be in conversation with Lauren Onkey. Dan Beck spent 20 years at Epic Records as head of publicity, product manager, and finally senior vice president of marketing and sales. He subsequently launched B2 Records as president of North America, and later formed his own entertainment marketing company. You've Got Michael, a memoir of his time working closely with Michael Jackson in the 1990s, is his first book. Born in 1943, Jerry Portnoy is a Grammy-nominated musician who played blues harmonica in the bands of both Muddy Waters and Eric Clapton, among others. His musical career has taken him to all 50 states and dozens of countries on 6 continents, with performances at the White House, Carnegie Hall, Radio City Music Hall, the Smithsonian, the Royal Albert Hall, and jazz festivals around the world. He is semi-retired and lives on Cape Cod with his wife. He has 2 children and 5 grandchildren. Lauren Onkey is director of the Corcoran School of the Arts and Design and professor of music at George Washington University. After the discussion, there will be a Q&A, which Elena will moderate. Please put your questions and comments in the chat as they come to you, and Elena will find them there at the end of the discussion. Feel free to also post comments throughout the conversation. So now I will turn things over to Dan, Jerry, and Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thanks, Eric, for asking me to be part of this tonight. These kinds of memoirs that Dan and Jerry have written are so fascinating and great reads, but they're also tremendously useful to us as we try to map out kind of the history of music practices and audiences and musicians. And so I'm really excited about both of these tonight. And I think they both are engaged with, 2 figures, Muddy Waters and Michael Jackson, at very interesting times of their careers too. That intersection with these legends. So really looking forward to the conversation. What we'll do is have Dan and Jerry present separately. I'll kind of intervene in the middle with some questions if time allows. So Dan, if you'd kick us off.
All right. I'm going to do a reading from the book. Much has changed in the making and marketing of music since the mid-1990s, when I was Michael Jackson's product manager at Epic Records. If you weren't around then, it may be hard to envision. In light of today's all-digital age, the intricacies and efforts once involved in making and selling music might seem enormous, bizarre even. There were virtually no cell phones. There was no streaming of music. In fact, there was no email outside of internal company messaging. We made phone calls and sent faxes. When music videos needed editing, we sent 3/4-inch tapes back and forth via FedEx until we had a finished version. Today, that can all be done in seconds. When an artist delivered a finished piece of music on 2-inch recording tape, it had to be mastered by a specialist. Test pressings were listened to and adjustments made before approval. Then it went off to a pressing plant to make metal parts and to manufacture copies. We took orders from retailers with over 23,000 record stores. Plans had to be made on how many went to each store, how many we would restock when they sold out. The way we got people to go into stores and buy our records by the millions, by and large, was to get the music on the radio. And back then, it wasn't as simple as getting a song on a syndicated morning show or on iHeart, which has hundreds of stations and generates millions of streams. We had to convince each program director at hundreds of local radio stations nationwide to play it in a coordinated, timely moment. That's when the retailers could feel the demand, or the lack thereof. And since record companies had very liberal return policies, unsold product could be sent back for credit. Today, much of that heavy lifting is gone. The timing factors and logistical strategies have melded into digital clicks that require neither tractor trailers or freestanding retail stores, or for that matter, maybe even terrestrial radio. In those horse and buggy days, I was one of the blacksmiths hammering out the tools, efforts, and direction to power physical singles and album releases. The introduction. The phone rang sharply, as it often did on weekends in the first 6 months of 1995. It must have been 3:30 a.m. I snapped awake on the first ring. I had a pretty good idea who it was. "Hey, Beck," came the soft, gentle, but upbeat voice. "It's Michael. How are you?" It was after midnight on his 3,000-acre ranch in California, but it didn't occur to him that it was 3 hours later at my home on Long Island in New York. He was completely oblivious to the idea that I might be sleeping. Michael Jackson was intensely focused on his new record, a double album titled History, Past, Present, and Future, Book One. One disc of 15 greatest hits, chosen by Michael and his team, was called History Begins. The other, History Continues, contained 13 new songs and 2 covers. Michael was the king of pop, the biggest artist on the planet. He'd won every significant music award, including the Grammy Legend. He had not one but 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one with the Jacksons. The NAACP had given him 9 Image Awards, with more to come. Yet he was highly prone to second-guessing. His overactive mind flooded with thoughts of creative alternatives as he wrestled with doubt and insecurity. At the record company, pressure mounted on everyone in the marketing department to roll the album out for maximum sales and boost the positivity of Michael's public profile. Each step of the pre-release preparation was crucial, especially since over the last 2 years, Michael had faced perhaps the most challenging hurdles of any superstar. The marketing campaign knew that a sales shortfall amounted to a career killer at the most extreme level. And Michael knew it more deeply than I could imagine. Anxiety at the inner echelons of Epic about the sustainability of Michael's career had intensified since the release of Dangerous in 1991. Following his joyful ascent to astonishing heights as a profoundly electrifying performer, dancer, songwriter, and music video innovator, Michael had been the subject of severe personal attacks in the media. As Michael indulged in his creative process, the concern for his ability to sell mountains of albums grew. And as the release for History was pushed back repeatedly over those 4 years, the alarming concern was that the King of Pop's career might crash and burn before his greatest hits collection was released. There was no backup plan, no replacement for those sales if Michael's scandals blew up before the album made it to the streets. So there was a definite sense of urgency within the company. Who knew what secrets might leak out and turn the Greatest Hits project into a disaster? After Michael and perhaps Epic Records chairman Dave Glue, I was probably the person who felt that anxiety the most. I was his marketing contact at the label. My job was to create the plan and coordinate the timing, creation, and completion of all the tools necessary to continue Michael's phenomenal record-selling success. My second role was to synchronize that strategy with him, his management, and the many departments within Epic and our parent company, Sony Music, which owned the global distribution system and the manufacturing plants that we relied on. It was also my responsibility to oversee the production of music videos, to monitor the cost of the campaign, and to make sure we didn't leave a single stone unturned to making his album a global success. Dave Glue, my boss, was as intense and eager as Michael was to reach that mega level of success. And they both looked at me. It was a lot of pressure. Michael had a funny, sweet sense of politeness about him. So while he called 4, 5, 6, 7 times every weekend, and at any time, but usually late at night or early morning, he rarely called twice in one night. Maybe he thought 2 calls would be an imposition, but maybe I was his personal Xanax for a short time just before the album dropped, and perhaps my words of reassurance helped him find the sleep that became heartbreakingly elusive for him in the end. Either way, he always seemed consoled by and genuinely grateful for the long-distance hand-holding. His good-natured sign-off to the conversations, he seemed solitary, so insulated, always left me aching and haunted a little. I invariably felt a sense of completion when we hung up. I was exhausted too. I would go back to bed and immediately find that precious deep sleep that eluded him. On the mornings after those calls, I wondered if he'd been up all night. In months leading up to the release of History, I sometimes felt like Michael's only friend. However, my role with Michael was no happenstance. I'd been at the core of Epic Records' marketing team for 15 plus years and had spearheaded hundreds of artist development and album release campaigns for artists as varied as The Clash, Cyndi Lauper, the Charlie Daniels Band, the Indigo Girls, and Luther Vandross. Luther and the Indigos were among my current projects, but we were also preparing to launch Sade and Pearl Jam. I had already had enough to do. The day in the fall of 1991, when Dave Glue stepped in my office doorway and said, simply and sternly, "Dan, you've got Michael." The next 5 years proved to be demanding, exhilarating, exhausting, and frightening. We had a view of a superstar who believed the media was bent on bringing him down amid the controversies of his skin color, multiple plastic surgeries, and ultimately the charges and the settlement of a child molestation case. In commanding what was arguably the most daunting marketing battle waged behind one album release, I saw no end in sight. Every day brought unimaginable surprises and unbelievable challenges. From literally begging our artist to deliver his greatest hits album before his career collapsed in shambles, to managing music video budgets that rose into the tens of millions of dollars. This is my story of those years at that task. I hope it provides a window into the making and marketing of a historic album, the recording industry as it was in the 1990s, and the professional life of one of the most remarkable talents in all of popular music. He was an incredibly complex man who has proven to be as mysterious and controversial in death as he was in life.
Thank you, Dan. I have a couple of questions for you. One is the obvious one. Why did you decide to write this book now, because it's been a while, and I
Yeah.
imagine, from reading a lot of the book, it's taken some time also to process a lot of that stuff. But could you frame that for us a little bit?
Yeah. I literally started writing down little sketches back when I was working with him. I would be in a meeting and think, I wish someone else could see this or hear this. That, it was interesting to me, that here was an artist, most artists, a manager, a booking agent, a road manager, maybe a publicist. Uh, there was a small team that you worked with. With Michael, there were lawyers and multiple PR people and hangers on, and there was just it was just such a larger environment that it just struck me that no one's ever seen this. And so over the years, I continued to write things down. And when when Michael passed, I was working with a young rapper. It was a gospel singer rapper who was a huge fan of Michael's. His name was Will Gray, and Will was constantly asking me questions about Michael, and he kept encouraging me. He said, "You've got to write this book. You've got to write this book." And and of course, Michael had passed, and then Will contracted cancer and died at 33 years old. And in that time, he was in and out of the hospital, and I would fly to LA. He lived in LA, and I'd be with him, and his wife was there, his mother was there, and I would leave them for a time to be alone with him. I would go to the cafeteria, and I started writing this book, and it was almost as a relief, but it was also telling myself what happened. It was like it's such an overload of information that even sorting out what happened when, and I got a lot of help from some editorial supporters that really helped me sort out the story and fact check it. But in a way, it was I had to tell myself the story first.
Um, yeah, I'll bet. Uh, was Epic equipped to handle this, or was any record company equipped to handle kind of the demands?
The I think that this is like the totally commercial side of the business,
Sure.
and when you look at the big companies, the Universals and the Warners and Sony Music, yeah, they are equipped. With Michael, the reason Joe Jackson brought the Jacksons to Epic back in 1975, 76 was because it was CBS Records then, later sold to Sony, was because we had a global operation. There were offices in countries all over the world, and for an artist like Michael, a superstar artist, and Michael had a joint venture. So it was our role was to be really a concierge service, a sales service, get it on the radio service, and so the company was pretty capable of that. What the other side of it is that relationship with the artist, and Michael had for 20 years had a wonderful relationship with Epic Records and the CBS Sony relationship. It Shortly after I left the company, things kind of went, not because I left, but things kind of turned bad between Sony and Michael. And but all the time that I had been there, when I wasn't directly involved so much with him, he had great relationships. He didn't know that many people in the company, uh, but the people that he knew, he was very much in touch with. He really wanted to know he wanted to know how radio worked and how, he is very much a student of the game. Frank DeLeo, who was his manager, who was head of radio promotion during the Thriller days, uh, you know, uh, Michael loved Frank because Frank really taught him how how music worked. But Michael was doing things like bringing Eddie Van Halen onto the Thriller project because Michael knew that was a gateway to expand his radio play to rock radio. In the U.S. Radio is these silos. It's R&B radio, it's adult contemporary, it's country, it's and unlike most of the rest of the world, it's very different. But Michael was a student of that, and really tried to really wanted to be marketed. He was into selling millions.
One last one before we move over to Jerry.
Uh-huh.
Was he as involved with the previous albums on the marketing side? I mean, in other words, was the weekend 3 a.m. call typical on earlier recordings, or had that kind of escalated over time?
I think that had escalated. Certainly he had that kind of relationship with Frank DeLeo. When Frank was there, then Frank left and became his manager. And but I know I know that Michael had a relationship with Larry Stessel, who was the product manager prior to me, and but I think a lot of particularly that last 6 months, with everything that had happened, with all the controversy and everything, I think Michael was. Uh, worried, about how it was going to be received. But he still also was dreaming of selling like 100 million copies. So you had to sort out between, the ecstasy and the agony. So it put a lot of pressure on us.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I'm sure there's going to be more questions from the audience. But let us now move to Jerry's new book. And Jerry, your book has also just come out in the last few months, right?
The publication date was May 13th.
That's
So
great.
it's been,
Um, about your own life as a musician and
well,
lots of other stops along
I'm
the
gonna
way.
hold it
And
up here.
there you go,
Now,
Dancing with Muddy.
the title is Dancing with Muddy, Muddy Waters, Eric Clapton, and My Lucky Life in and Out of the Blues, because the original title, The Autobiography of Jerry Portnoy, I just didn't think that would have much appeal to the public. So obviously, I had to use the bigger names. But the essential thing was that I called it My Lucky Life in and Out of the Blues, because when I refer to it in an email or something, I always refer to it as an autobiography slash memoir, because the musical aspect, well, there's a little teaser at the start, but my musical career doesn't really begin in earnest or in a serious way until 100 pages have gone in the book. Um, my early life was pretty interesting. I mean, I think, I don't know, it was Samuel Pepys, or some people say it was Hemingway, said that any man's life is worth telling if it's told well. And I totally believe that, because everybody has triumphs and tragedies in their lives, and it's a matter of telling it well. I mean, I think that ostensibly the incidents of my life may be more interesting other people since I've traveled so extensively and I played all over the world with, big name music stars. So I do have the anecdotes. But oddly enough, my story really begins in a section of Chicago where I was born called Maxwell Street, the Maxwell Street Market in the 1940s. And the black musicians who were leaving the South for not only better paying jobs in the war industries of the North during World War II, but also the mechanical cotton picker was introduced in 1944. And that gave the plantation owners an economic incentive to mechanize because one machine could do the work of 50 field hands. And that was really the death knell of the sharecropper system. So when the mechanical cotton picker came in along with the war and the jobs in the North, millions of black people walked out of the cotton fields down south, especially Mississippi and the Mississippi Delta, which is where this kind of blues comes from. There's all kinds of regional styles of blues, what they call Piedmont blues out of the Carolinas. They have a little different feel.
Yes.
But the deepest and heaviest kind of blues came out of the Mississippi Delta, and it was really the foundation of rock and roll. And what happened was that when the musicians left the South, they came up, they went north, and some of them stopped along the way. Some of them went no further than Memphis or St. Louis, but it basically followed the Mississippi. The promised land was Chicago. And when they would get to Chicago, the musicians, they would play outdoors in the Maxwell Street Market. And so they were playing right outside my father's carpet store where I was a kid running around the whole Maxwell Street area. And little Walter, who's generally considered the greatest of all blues harmonica players, he played half a block from my father's store, right across from this delicatessen where the book actually opens. The prologue is in this delicatessen, and it was one of the most just amazing emotional moments for me because I walked in there in 1981. And the name, it used to be called Lions. It was run by a guy named Ben Lyon. And anyway, I went in there. I hadn't been in there for years. And there was it was a Jewish delicatessen, but it had been sold to a black guy. And there was a little old black lady behind the slicing machine. And I said to her, "Didn't this place used to be called Lions?" And she said, "Oh, Lord, that was a long time ago." And her son, she pointed to her son. She said, "That's my son, Nate, a big black guy." And he heard it and he motioned me over and he said, "You remember when this place was called Lions?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "My father had a store right down the street." He says, "What was the name of it?" I say, "Max Portnoy and Son, King of Carpets." The look on his face, it was just shock. And he leaned over the counter and he looked at me and he just said, "My God, you're Jerry Portnoy. You're the champ's son," because my father was known all over Chicago as a champ. Anyway, he knew me from the time I was a kid. And then I said to him, I told him my father had passed away a dozen years earlier, and he knew my mother, he knew my family, which was a shock to me. And just kind of out of the blue, I said to him, "Didn't little Walter used to play around here?" And he pointed out his front window. He said, "Right there." So I had heard this stuff. And then, of course, we had an interesting exchange because later he said to me, he said, "You're more Schwarzer than I am, and I'm more Yiddish than you are." Because, as I pointed out in the prologue, in a sense, we had mirror image backgrounds because I was Jewish, raised professionally by black people in the blues. And he was black, raised by Jewish people in his business because Nate actually spoke fluent Yiddish as opposed to the scant few words that I knew. And so writing the early part of the book, growing up on Maxwell Street, is a very colorful chapter on Maxwell Street that is the first chapter. And then it just follows me on my my adventures, you know, my school years and all that kind of stuff. And I dropped out of college. I had developed a certain skill with the pool cue early in my life, and I wound up managing the largest pool hall in Chicago. And I used to run around with, I knew Minnesota Fats and real pool hustlers, which is a lost breed now. People like Cornbread Red and Daddy Warbucks and the Knoxville Bear and all these people. I had adventures in pool halls all around the country. And then I was drafted into the Army, and I was a paratrooper early in the Vietnam War. And then I applied for a discharge as a conscientious objector. And the story of my military career is quite interesting. I actually went to war with the Army, and I won that war. I kind of used the bureaucracy against itself. You know the writer Jerzy Kosinski?
Sure.
Yeah. So he wrote The Painted Bird and other stuff. Anyway, he always said that the thing he was proudest of was getting out of Eastern Europe, because what he did, he managed to get a hold of a letterhead from a government agency and used that as the starting point to generate correspondence, and he made them spit out an exit visa. So anyway, I kind of played the Army bureaucracy, and it saved my life, because I was a airborne medic, and you know, there was a serious sword of Damocles hanging over me. So I talk about, you know, the pool hall and my Army career, and then I was bumming around Europe in 1968. And while I was over there, well, just before I left, somebody gave me a harmonica to take with me. And while I was over there, I was staying in this crash pad in Uppsala, Sweden, and I went downtown and walked into a record store, and I found this album with a cover of a black guy, Sonny Boy Williamson, with the harp stuck in his mouth the long way. And I said, well, I got to see what this is about. So I brought it back to the crib I was staying at, and I was never the same. I became obsessed as soon as I heard that record. And the next day, actually, the place was raided by the police, and I was jailed for a while, and managed to convince the detective on my case to get me a ticket back to the States, because I was upset. From the moment I heard that record, I had to learn blues harmonica, and I knew I had to get back to the States to do it. So I was put on a plane and sent back to JFK. And then I went out to California and started getting involved in the music scene and meeting people and buying records. And then my dad got sick, and I went back to Chicago. And of course, Chicago was it. That's where it was really happening.
Sure.
And then I got a job. I was actually working at Cook County Jail, and my time at the jail is also obviously in the book and quite interesting. And I was working at the jail when Muddy Waters hired me. And actually, I'd been playing in small clubs around Chicago and driving a cab, but I wasn't making much money, and it had come down to the point where I had to find a real job. and I saw a notice in the paper that there was a job with the Illinois State Employment Service at Cook County Jail, but you had to be a college graduate, which I was not. And I happened to mention that at dinner to a couple that I was having dinner with my girlfriend, and I said, you know, I had to have a college transcript, and I'm not a college grad. My girlfriend was though, and the fellow we were having dinner with, he said to me, "Well, I always wanted to try my hand at forgery." He said, "Not money, mind you, other things." So anyway, we used my girlfriend's transcript as a template, and now I must say the statute of limitations has
Yes, you're
expired.
good. You're
So,
fine. You're good there.
so anyway, he made one up. It looked beautiful. I took the test. I passed it. I submitted the transcript. That passed, and I got a job at Cook County Jail, which was quite an experience. And I was working there when Muddy Waters hired me.
Yeah,
And
Jerry, can we talk about that muddy connection? And I want to make sure we've got time for others to ask you
well,
questions
sure,
too.
because
Um,
that
and
was
that's a kind of that's mid 70s, right?
yes,
That you
yes,
start, right? So it's kind of towards the latter part of his career, but
correct.
he's recording such great records there. One, more than one that you're on, but I'm thinking particularly of I'm Ready. Um, but could you talk a little bit about kind of when you first started playing with him and what that band was like at the time for you to enter?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Oddly enough, I had no trouble writing any of it until the point I got with Muddy.
Uh,
I actually land the gig. I was stuck, and I just really didn't know what to do with it. And then I found a complete itinerary for his entire career on the internet, and that was like the Rosetta Stone. That just, I just scrolled down to the date I joined the band, and then oh, yeah. And then I remember that date. That's where this happened. And then it triggered all the memories and the anecdotes. But when I got with Muddy, he was just really beginning his rise, um, because he was a big star in the black community in the early 50s when blues was on the R&B charts. But and it was the popular music of the black community, but it got supplanted by Motown and soul and funk and other kinds of R&B. So it had fell out of favor in the black community, but as everybody knows, the British invasion brought the brought attention to black blues to white kids. So uh, when they would see a Rolling Stones record and they would see a song credited to McKinley Morganfield, which is Muddy's real name, or Chester Burnett, which is Howlin' Wolf's name, they would start investigating that. So blues started, and then white people started playing Paul Butterfield and Charlie Musselwhite and
sure.
Johnny Winter. So they started generating a bigger white audience. And of course, Muddy, all the white musicians revered Muddy. So, uh, excuse me. So his career started to actually take off. He had new management, and so I joined him at a time when his career was on the rise.
Yeah, and Johnny Winter produced did Johnny Winter produce any of that stuff that you
Yes,
worked on, Jerry?
yes, he did because he had a label called Blue Sky, and he signed Muddy, and those albums. The first one was Hard Again,
Yeah.
and then I think maybe then it was
I'm
I'm
Ready, the one you're on, I
Ready
think.
and Miss Muddy Mississippi Waters Live, and yeah. So we put out those records, and we toured, all over the country and overseas, and played a lot of prestigious gigs. And also, we opened up for Eric Clapton, and that's where Clapton became aware of me, and he would frequently call Muddy and me, just Muddy and me, out to play his encore with him. And many years later, when he was getting, there had been talk for years about Clapton making a real blues album, and finally he got ready to do it. And I thought, I might have a shot if he was going to use a harmonica, and I got the call. And of course, that was really a life changer because the contrast between playing with Muddy Waters, who's an icon in the blues world, and playing with Eric Clapton, he's a fine blues player, but he's an icon in the rock world. The difference between those worlds is clearly delineated in my book.
Yeah. Very different hotels.
Uh, yes.
What an amazing life. I want to make sure we have time for folks to ask questions. I know there's a couple in the chat. Alina, should I be using those or am I handing that to you? Sorry to.
Yes, I'll take over now. So thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Alex, do you want to ask the question?
Sure. First off, I'm really looking forward to reading both of these books. My question was for Dan. I was curious to what extent Motown shaped Michael's business acumen. If this is something that like kind of, I'm just sort of curious if these were things that he was like the sort of business side, if he was interested in that like as a very young person and carried that into his solo career, or if yeah, I'm just sort of curious how or if Motown kind of shapes his interest in the business side.
When he first came to Epic in 1975, 76, uh, uh, he expressed his desire to produce and write and be a solo artist. And so the leadership at the label really encouraged him to do that. And of course, that evolved a few years later. But he John Branca, who was his attorney through many years, John really rose from his copyright knowledge and his expertise in the publishing world, and he really informed Michael, really encouraged Michael to, when Michael suddenly had this wealth that he should invest that way. And of course, Paul McCartney actually encouraged Michael that he should get involved in the publishing business. And as I understand it, that Paul actually was offered the ATV catalog, which Michael bought, and thought the price was too high, and Michael turned around and bought it. And Paul, I guess, didn't value his own writing as much as Michael did. But Michael was a student of everything. I mean, he as far as dance, he took Fred Astaire out to lunch, and he wanted to learn from great people. He was a student of really everything, whether it was dance or making film. So he and he worked very, very hard at all of those things. So was he a brilliant business person? Well, I mean, you have to look at the successes he had. But knowing him, as much as people think of him as idiosyncratic, or he was a pretty normal guy. That in terms of my dealing with him, is very interested in market research. Asked me to bring him stuff. A lot of it was very negative, and to present that to someone when there's personal things said. Michael was pretty brave and wanting to understand all that.
Thank you.
Right. We have a question from Chris Malanthi, but he's gone, so I'm just going to read it for you. Dan, I look forward to reading your book. I'll ask my question and might have to log off. Well, yes. Anyway, since your book on Michael seems to pivot around the 90s, I wonder how sounds can change the pressures of your job. I have to imagine Jackson wanted his opening week sales to be dazzling, which was more visible in the SoundScan era, post 1991. Was that hanging over your head by 1995 and history, or was the pressure always intense because it was Michael Jackson?
Uh, well, certainly the pressure of having that reality of sales figures created pressure. I talk in the book about a plan that Polly Anthony, who was head of promotion at Epic, and I created. One of the things to try to stimulate to get Michael to deliver the album was we were trying to come up with never been done before ideas. And we brought an idea to him of trying to bring Scream in at number one the first week. And it had never been done before. And so at one night on the Scream video shoot, I sat down with Michael. I had explained this to Michael several times, actually. But on the set, Janet was there. And Michael, it was kind of cute because, Big Brother, he wanted to show his sister that his record people were doing these great things for him, So he had me explain to Janet how our strategy for bringing that record in at number one. We actually didn't do it. I think it came in at number 5. And then Polly and I regrouped and recreated the plan because you had to get radio points and you had to get retail points also. So we reconstructed the plan and we actually brought You're Not Alone into the charts at number 1. And these were times when the biggest fear we had was that pop radio was going to leave Michael because they were listening to the tabloids and the negative press and fundamentally they did leave him after You Are Not Alone. We brought that in at number 1. In the next 14 years of Michael's life, he only had one song that reached number 10 on the charts. U.S. pop radio left Michael. And that was one of our fears, and the rest of the world, he had chart records, singles and hits, and because it wasn't siloed like the U.S. where it's pop and rock and so.
Thank you. Lauren, do you want to ask a question of Jerry?
Sure, and I'll combine it with the Peter question. Jerry, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how Muddy worked in the studio and how involved he was in the recording process. I mean, by the time you guys worked together, he recorded a lot. What was that studio like? And can you compare that with Eric Clapton's working style in the studio?
Well, I mean, Muddy didn't like, he didn't like take after take. Of course, actually, Eric didn't either. I mean, when we cut From the Cradle, he was insistent that everything be live. Vocals, we played together. If somebody made a mistake or there was a flub, we just do the whole track again. So it was a real live recording. The only fixes or dubs or anything was on just, I think, the track How Long. But other than that, that whole record is live. Muddy, he could get frustrated depending on who was producing. I remember one time we did a Dr. Pepper commercial. This isn't one of his regular recordings, but they had some jingle written out for him, and he was, not highly literate, but he managed to, somebody told him the lyrics, he memorized them or whatever. but it wasn't really natural for his way of speaking, and we must have done like 22 takes or something. Finally, after the last one, he said, "That's it, we're done." So he had enough of that. But let's see, the first. Yeah, I did a couple studio albums with him, and then we did one live album. But the studio stuff was, it was pretty easy going, and I was, especially on the "I'm Ready" album, I was very happy. First of all, that I was recording with him, that Muddy gave me the vote of confidence, and also Big Walter Horton was also on that record, and we did a couple of duets, and that was fun to play with Big Walter because I used to go over to his house and drink with him and all that. Yeah. So, but the books, the book accomplished what I set out. I never wanted this to be a book just for blues people or harmonica players. I wanted it to be a good read for the general reader. And I mean, all the feedback I've had and the reviews, if you pick it up and you start, the narrative carries you along. And that's what I really wanted to do with this book.
Okay, thank you. Did we cover Eric Clapton, or should we maybe Peter? Peter, do you want to still ask your question or add anything to it?
About Eric Clapton?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, that was just my little add-on. Sure, if you want to talk more about Eric Clapton, that'd be great. Otherwise, we can move on.
okay.
It was a great gig, it was going from like Lauren said, it was going from Motel 6 to the Four Seasons. So I got nothing to say about Eric except he saved my life as far as I'm concerned. When I got the call, well, what had happened, I was scuffling with my own band playing around the East Coast and it's a hand-to-mouth existence and all that. And then one evening the phone rang and it was Mike Kappas who ran the Rosebud Agency, and they booked all the top blues acts. They had booked Muddy and John Lee Hooker and Robert Cray and the Staple Singers and a slew of people. And I knew he wasn't calling to book me, unfortunately. But he said that Eric Clapton's people had been trying to get a hold of me, and they called him to see if he could run me down. And he said he thought that they wanted me to play with Eric in the coming year at the Albert Hall. And he asked me, should I pass your number along to Roger Forster, who was Eric's manager, or do you want to call him yourself? I said, I'll call him. I didn't want to leave it in somebody else's hands. And I wound up calling the next morning. But anyway, when I hung up the phone with Mike Kappas, my wife and I jumped out of bed and started dancing around the house because our ship had come in. As I say in the book, it's a line from the blues that says, the sun's going to shine in my back door someday. And that day had arrived. So, yeah, it was a good gig.
Thank you. Well, I have a question for Dan. You mentioned international distribution of Michael's records, and I wonder, and that it actually kept up even when he wasn't as popular. Didn't have as many best-selling records in the US. And it's true because I remember when he died in Moscow, there was a shrine made for him near the American embassy. So he was incredibly popular in Russia. I wonder how that international fame was constructed. I mean, besides him being very talented, obviously, was touring part of it? Was it MTV, television performances? What was the strategy?
I think it was a combination of that. number one, the records played on radio over there. The videos certainly exploded him, from the early '80s, and then Michael really did much more touring internationally than he did in the States, and so I believe we considered that about 30% of his albums sold in North America and 70% sold in the rest of the world. And so there was a huge, as Lisa Kramer, who was my counterpart for international, she said, that the international record people always said Michael belongs to us. So it was a big deal. There was one thing that after Thriller, that I remember Paul Berger, who ran our Israeli company back in the Thriller days, and Paul mentioning our company in Israel distributed to a lot of North African countries as well. And Paul commented at one international meeting that I was in that Michael sold more albums in some of the North African countries than there were equipment to play them on. So, people were buying the record, they couldn't even play it. They had to have it, So
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much to Dan, Jerry, and Lauren for.
Hey, can I ask Dan a question?
Oh, of course, we have time.
Hey, Dan.
Yes, Jerry.
How'd you like working with Cyndi Lauper?
Great, chaotic at times, but she always had a vision. We did a lot of great fun things in those early days. I'm actually pushing the broom at the end of Time After Time when she and her boyfriend split at the trade station. I'm back there with
I did a few gigs with her.
Yeah.
Not a pleasant experience.
She can be tough on people, that's for sure.
I thought she was a nasty piece of work myself, but that's rock and roll.
And Jerry, Cicero Murphy.
Yeah, the great black
we have to get together and play some pool together.
Listen, I lived in pool halls. I know that world.
Yeah,
I've been into two things in my life: billiards and blues. I was a three cushion player, actually.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
But I had, well, if you pick up my book, the chapter on the pool hall is you will love it.
That's fantastic. And I will definitely be reading it. It's great. Yeah, your story is awesome.
It amazes me really when I think about my own life. I can't believe it. Just lucky. So.
Okay. Any more questions from anybody? All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you both so much.
It was super interesting. Please come to our next session, which is going to be on the 19th of November, talking about teen magazines and the history of Rolling Stone.